It should come at no surprise that general hygiene has changed since the 1900s. Luckily, by this time, regular bathing had become more prevalent, especially for those who had lifestyles that would mean getting dirty. As I have shown in a previous video, bathing was a bit of a hassle. In times before indoor plumbing, but with indoor bathing a necessity, unless you were concerned with privacy or weather, you would have to bring water from the pump outside, inside, and if you wanted your bath warm, you had to warm it on the stove. Some houses did have the convenience of a water pump in the basement under the homes, or even in the mudroom or kitchen, but that was not a luxury I or many people would have had. So if I want to bathe, I have to lug my tub and my buckets of water into the house. As mentioned in the previous video, shampoo was just a decade off from being commercially available to most people in the US. During this time, dry shampoo did exist, but it was limited to just a handful of drugstores and caused hair to be dull, sticky, and breakable. So for our rural people, a good old-fashioned bar of white tallow soap or Castile soap, usually mixed with herbs to improve scent, would work just fine for hair, face, and body. It was also very common for people to wash their hair with a mixture of vinegar and water either by itself or right after washing with soap. This acid bath would help balance the hair's pH and improve shine, which would be thrown off by the alkalinity of the soap. Vinegar would also clean the hair much like soap did. Now, conditioner was also just getting its start around this time. Introduced during the 1900 Exposition Universelle in Paris by French perfume company Ed Pinaud, Brillatine, a precursor to modern conditioner, promised to soften men's beards and mustache hairs. But it would not be mainstream in the US until much later, and modern commercial conditioners would not be widely used in the US for quite some time. So what was used before conditioner? Well, if soap and acid bath wasn't enough, natural oils of all sorts would work just fine. Olive oil, coconut oil, lard, castor, macassar, Vaseline, and pomade were popular not only for the conditioning, but also their styling capabilities. But any clean, unused, and debris-free natural oil a person could get their hands on would do. For the rest of your body, a plain bar of soap and scrub brush or rag would do just fine, in place of today's body wash. So now that we're squeaky clean, let's talk about other hygiene routines. Dental hygiene in particular has changed quite a bit, and certainly for the better. Daily brushing of the teeth did not become popular until after World War II, when soldiers were required to brush their teeth daily. Up until then, the average person brushed their teeth every few days or so. And with what we're about to learn, I don't really blame them. The toothbrush, while having existed in some form for thousands of years, did have modern changes in the US around the late 1700s, with a handle made out of bone with holes bored into it where boar bristles would be fastened. This technology originated in China around the 11th century and was brought to the US via European trade and immigration. However, boar hair bristles, or any animal hair bristles for that matter, are not recommended in modern day because the bristles retain bacteria, do not dry out efficiently, and fall out frequently. Imagine having like 10 bristles in your mouth. Eek. While dental floss in its current form, a thin waxy thread that you can cut to your preferred length, has existed since the 1800s, flossing would not become mainstream in the US until the 70s. And let's be honest, who flosses regularly? Admittedly, I only floss if I know there's something stuck between my teeth. Toothpaste powder was most commonly used during this time. While commercial varieties were available, often it was homemade, with many recipes calling from anything from burnt breadcrumbs to brick powder. Baking soda was particularly popular and was often mixed with herbs and some form of sweetener. In the modern day, toothpaste powders are not recommended because the grains, be that baking soda, charcoal, or bricks, are too abrasive for the enamel and wear it down. Additionally, the other ingredients either did nothing to prevent plaque or worse, encouraged it, such as with that sweetener. So I will not be recreating that aspect of the 1900s. But there was an invention that was growing more popular during this time. A toothpaste made by mixing baking soda with hydrogen peroxide. Sorry folks, but there are reasons why this channel is not 100% recreation, and stuff like this is one of them. I will continue to use modern day dental care products. On to facial care. Most of us wash our faces regularly, or at least we should. In the 1900s was no different. But instead of modern day facial cleansers, moisturizers, and whatnot, we had food. When you didn't want to risk harsh cleaners such as hydrogen peroxide, there you are again, you stinky bastard, shoo! Or acetone, known to cause that smell in nail polish remover, people would put foods such as egg yolks, honey, and oatmeal on their skin. Honey and oats sound more like breakfast to me. All that stickiness in my face sounds like a sensory nightmare, so I have not been doing that. For moisturizer, various oils were popular too, such as lard or olive oil. But most people just use plain old water with maybe soap, such as that used for your hair. Your typical facial routine was a splash of water and exfoliation from a towel. Something like honey or oatmeal could be used on the skin as often as you preferred, but due to practicality and not wanting to waste that much food, it would typically be kept to a once-a-week thing, if that. So now that our faces are clean, let's talk about shaving. Seeing as I am a man, I'm going to talk about shaving of the face. Shaving the body hair, such as armpits and leg hair, like many people today choose to do, was not something commonly done in the 1900s. This practice did exist, but would only become popular in the 20s and 30s among women in tandem with shorter skirts and sleeves. Before the advent of the safety razor in 1904, you either shaved yourself with a knife or straight blade in a mirror, or you frequently went to the barber to keep that smooth appearance. Shaving also became popular for the same reasons short hair for men did. It was more convenient if you worked a labor-intensive job. A sweaty beard is so itchy. And the soldiers came back from the Great War with clean faces, as gas masks wouldn't fit properly with anything but a short mustache. It was just as fashionable as it was patriotic. It was largely considered good hygiene to have a clean face at the time. It is, of course, entirely possible to have perfect hygiene and still have a beard and mustache. Facial hair care for men is just as important as head hair care. A beard or mustache must be kept clean and free of debris, conditioned so it remains soft and combed if it's long enough, and it can get everywhere into everything if you're not careful enough. Although we wouldn't see a complete switch in attitudes regarding facial hair until World War I, even in the 1900s, a clean-shaven face was considered a sign of a well-groomed, proper man, someone who was modern, civilized, and educated. Some even considered a clean face a sign of affluence. However, much like my long hair, I will reject 1900s modernity and keep my current style. As mentioned, the safety razor was invented by Gillette in 1904, and I have been using one of these older models for years, as it is not much different from those that would have been available to me during the 1900s. I don't trust myself with a straight blade or a knife, so I'm thankful that the safety razor appears just in the nick of time. So now that we have our shaving device, what about shaving cream? Well, shaving cream would not be invented until 1919, and widespread usage of it would come even later. So we see that once again a normal bar soap was used. Soap, how versatile. The soap would be worked into a nice lather with a brush and applied to the face to soften the hair and act as a lubricant for the blade. The soap would also clean the skin of any accidental cuts. Aftershave, used to sterilize any cuts and add a nice fragrance, would also be a decade off from its advent, being invented in 1917. I myself have not used aftershave in quite a while, so by no means is it a necessary part of the shaving process, nor will I miss it. While we're on the subject of hair, let's talk about hair styling. In the late 1800s, it was common for men to part their hair in the middle as it was considered stylish. However, by the turn of the century, parting the hair in the middle was starting to be seen as feminine, with the side part taking popularity. For men with short hair, it was stylish to keep it perfectly in place, which is hard to do if you're wearing a hat and constantly taking it on and off, and this is where pomade comes in. As mentioned, pomade, macassar oil, and Vaseline were very popular hairstyling products used to keep hair in place and also give it a nice shine. It got everywhere, however, staining hats and the backs of furniture, as the greasy substance trapped dust, dirt, soot, and all kinds of debris in the air and on people's skin. It should come at no surprise that during a time when less than 1% of the population had indoor plumbing, hand washing occurred less frequently. Typically, hands would be washed only when visibly dirty, or when otherwise was convenient. It was common for people not to wash their hands after using the outhouse, when interacting with the ill, or before handling food. It wasn't until the 1980s that the U.S. Center for Disease Control identified hand hygiene as important to preventing the spread of disease. This only after a large string of foodborne illness outbreaks. Of course, by then, it was already considered good hygiene to wash one's hands frequently. By the late 1800s, the need for hand washing in order to prevent disease was finally accepted by the medical community. The general public, of course, was also informed around this time, the 1890s to 1900s. However, the uptake of this practice by the public would be gradual, reaching the rural areas last. It was common during this time for people, especially older adults, to still hold on to miasma theory, which was popular up until the mid to late 1800s, when it was replaced with germ theory. Once public health campaigns spurred by the anti-tuberculosis movement started talking about germ theory and how pretty much everyone is a walking petri dish, people started to take their hygiene more seriously, at least briefly. People washed their hands more, shook hands less, kissed less, and men started to keep their faces clean-shaven now more than ever. However, this was short-lived as the practice gradually died down, especially after World War II, and with the widespread availability of vaccines and antibiotics. These pharmaceuticals caused disregard for germs in everyday life now that there were easy and accessible preventions and treatments. Not to say that hand washing completely disappeared, it was just a less common habit. I mean, even with the modern conveniences of plumbing and widespread knowledge of the importance of hand washing, still roughly 3 out of 10 people don't wash their hands after using the restroom, and less than half wash their hands before handling food. Worse still, only about 2 out of 5 people wash their hands after handling animal or human waste. You know who you are, you nasty. Around the 80s with the AIDS pandemic, around the late 2000s with the H1N1 pandemic, and recently with the COVID-19 pandemic, public interest in personal hygiene and non-pharmaceutical disease prevention increased. It seems that the American public only really cares about washing their hands when they are reminded that germs exist and can kill you. For obvious reasons, I am choosing to keep up with my regular hand washing habits. However, in the spirit of the project, I will be using a wash basin instead of a regular faucet to do so. Let's talk about paper. Paper products such as paper towels, paper napkins, tissues, and toilet paper were either not invented yet or not in popular use by this time. This video is already getting pretty long, so I won't go into the sordid history of all of them. Suffice to say, a lot of these products replaced cloth-based items for their convenience and were promoted as the hygienic alternative. This, of course, was purely marketing. Cloth towels were used in place of paper towels, obviously. Cloth napkins in place of paper, of course. Handkerchiefs in place of tissues, which, if you keep them in a cloth bag, are perfectly hygienic. It is a lot of laundry, but it is a lot less waste and less money too. Like a lot less money. Plus, you're saving trees while you're at it. I highly recommend going back to cloth for these reasons, especially if you have the modern convenience of washing machines and dryers. Toilet paper is an exception in this case. Toilet paper was introduced in the mid-1800s to replace newspapers or whatever people had lying around, be that leaves, corn cobs, old rags, or pages from the Farmer's Almanac. Side note, using the pages from the Farmer's Almanac was so common that the publishers pre-drilled a hole in their books to make hanging it on the outhouse more convenient in 1919. This feature can still be found in some of their books to this day. By 1890, toilet paper was being sold on rolls. However, there were still a few kinks to be worked out. It wasn't until the 1930s that some toilet paper was being advertised as splinter-free. And in the 1900s, it was still quite thick, as most people didn't have flush toilets and so didn't have to worry about clogging their pipes. But still, it was considered a general improvement from newspapers and corn cobs. Being softer, easier for bacteria to break down, and giving a better clean, toilet paper skyrocketed in popularity, especially as the flush toilet became more popular. I do get the newspaper, but I am not liking the idea of using it instead of toilet paper, so this is once again a hygiene habit of mine that will remain modern. On to the last topic of the video, deodorants. The first modern equivalent of deodorant was Mum in 1888, which was a cream applied to the underarms to reduce odor using a zinc compound as its active ingredient. One would simply take their fingers and apply the cream to odorous areas. Mum was later rebranded as Ban in the 1950s, and is still available on the market today, though in roll-on form. EverDry, an antiperspirant, came just about 2 decades later in the 1900s. However, EverDry was an aluminum chloride solution that was dabbed on with a cotton swab to less than desirable results. EverDry took forever to dry, ironically, was messy, and had a nasty habit of stinging the user and eating their clothes. Of course, this is yet another aspect of my hygiene routine that I have chosen to keep modern. I prefer this spray-on deodorant.